Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. Joe Samieho, along with Jim Schneider, Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish, and Isha Azim. Big thank you to our Patreon subscribers, calling the show, Mark, Robin, and our newest one, David, for investing in the Grid Network. Each and every month, you too can invest in the Grid Network. Link in the video description. Help us get to the track more frequently, especially once we hit $500 more. And of course, you could do buy me a cup of coffee, where you set the amount, the frequency, and you could buy a cup of coffee for anyone in the Grid Network team. Just put there in your purchase of coffee who is going to. And easiest way to support us, subscribe to us right here on YouTube. We do this for you, the viewers, and our passion of motorsports. What a F1 season we're getting so far. 11 races down, 11 to go in this Formula One World Championship. Next race weekend is the Belgium Grand Prix. And if Max Verstappen is to get the win in the first fastest lap, he could really start to eliminate drivers being mathematically eligible for the championship. But let's be honest, the math may say you still have a shot at the championship. It looks very much unlikely Verstappen's going to have a second half of the season collapse. 2 more wins by Max, and he would win half of the season, essentially, when it comes to all the races. Ben, starting with you. Does Max Verstappen have one hand on championship, and is it really over?
Well, first of all, before I get into my comments here on the F1 segment, welcome to Team Isha. Happy to have you. I think this is the first time we've been on the air together. Great to have another member of the team discussing what you're right, Joe. Has been a phenomenal Formula One season here for Red Bull, phenomenal season for Max Verstappen. And I think we're getting the easy questions out of the way early tonight, right? Because, of course, Max Verstappen has one hand on the championship. And I'll even go a step further and say I think Red Bull have one hand on the Constructors' Championship, because for all we've been talking about Sergio Perez struggling and to match Max Verstappen's pace, struggling to get everything out of the Red Bull that he ought to be getting out of it. He did have a nice recovery drive to get back to the podium again today. But he is still solidly second in points, a full race worth of points ahead of Fernando Alonso in the championship to secure second for Red Bull there. And looks like they could take the 1-2 finish that they were hoping to get last year, but they still haven't gotten. One of the few things they haven't done in their time in Formula One. I think they've got that pretty much on lockdown at this point as well, even if Checo continues to underperform a little bit, because let's be honest, he's been underperforming and he still has a solid gap over third place in the championship himself. So it's been absolutely incredible to watch for dominance. And I'll make this note, Joe, you talk about Max Verstappen, how much he's been winning. He's on a streak of 7 in a row now. The record is 9. It's held by a former Red Bull driver, Sebastian Vettel. And you could also make an argument it's held by Alberto Ascari, shared record as well. Ascari's record kind of gets a little iffy when it comes to, how some people view the championship back then, because, of course, the Indianapolis 500 used to be part of the World Championship, but very few European teams made the trip over. So of the 9 straight races that Ascari started, he won 9 in a row there. So you could say he shares the record with Sebastian Vettel. If Max Verstappen is able to continue this stretch, he would tie the record at his home race in the Netherlands, and he would break the record at Ferrari's home race in Monza in the Italian Grand Prix, which would also be Alberto Ascari's old home track and the home track of Ferrari. Of course, Sebastian Vettel drove for Ferrari for many years as well. He didn't win a championship for them like Ascari did, but how do you like that? It works out so perfectly that he could break the record, that he could tie the record at his home race and break their record at their home race. It's been absolutely phenomenal what Verstappen and Red Bull have been able to do so far this season.
Yeah, I agree with him. Everything that Red Bull has accomplished, specifically Max Verstappen, has been amazing this year so far. And, I think that Max Verstappen is well on his way to being the world champion again this year. The lead that he has over the rest of the teams is insane. And even if other teams like Ferrari, McLaren, or Mercedes bring more upgrades and better strategies, Max is already too far ahead this season. For example, if you take a look at McLaren's performances in the last 3 races, you can see that they've improved big time. Yet, they've even got the podium, but even today, Max in the last few laps was over 30 seconds ahead of Lando Norris. And if you look at Mercedes' performance today, Lewis Hamilton himself said that they just don't have the pace to compete with the Red Bulls or to beat Max Verstappen. So I think it's safe to say that Max will definitely be crowned world champion at the end of the season.
And the season, potentially, I anticipate it's going to be earlier. It's going to be really interesting to see when he could get this all wrapped up, the pace he's going. I think it's not going to take too long unless we know sometimes Spa, it could be unpredictable, but that seems to be one of his great strengths. I just don't see where he's going to do anything wrong in his home race. And then Monza, that could be a little bit of an issue. But at that point, those 2 wins, it's going to be, I think, game over for a lot of folks. While Red Bull, for their Constructors' Championship, as you mentioned, Ben, I think it is already game over. Yes, Checo could have some issues here and there, but unless he has a disastrous second half of the season, I anticipate we're going to see Red Bull take that. McLaren, they're seeing a revival in this second half of the season. As you mentioned, Isha, 2 double podiums. Well, excuse me, correction. 2 podiums in the last 2 races, but not double podiums. Norris, second place. Piastri, 5th place. So once again, he's finishing up there top towards the points, earning those points, while their rival in the constructor, which was Alpine, double DNF. They were both done before the 3rd lap began. So Alpine, is there trouble in there? Because not only did they had a double DNF, so they really couldn't put together much of a race. Just 2 days ago, they replaced their CEO, Laurent Rossi, with immediate effect. So new CEO coming in, disastrous weekend. Do you feel like Alpine's a team in serious trouble? And can McLaren potentially bring that fight to Ferrari?
I think at this point, it's safe to say that McLaren has already brought the fight to Ferrari. I think that with the upgrades they brought to the last 3 races, the car is outperforming Ferrari's, and they've set a better race pace as well. Now, as far as Alpine is concerned, I think that there is some serious trouble internally, at least to some degree, and like you mentioned, they replaced their CEO, Laurent Rossi, with Felipe Krief, who only joined Alpine back in February. So the fact that they made this switch halfway through the season, I think it's definitely evidence to the fact that, they are internally struggling and are trying to fix the problems the best way that they can.
I forgot Ferrari was in the race today. That's how off pace they've been. That's how irrelevant they've been. Unfortunately, it's been 15 years since they won a championship of any kind in Formula One, and I think it's safe to say that streak is going to continue. 7th and 8th today. I think that's more the fight with McLaren now. Is can McLaren catch Ferrari more than, or are they going to have to worry about continuing to fight Alpine, because Alpine had an absolutely awful start and an awful weekend. Once again, it does seem like there's some inter-team conflicts that they might have to work out. But my goodness, where did this pace come from McLaren? I mean, their best finish with either of their 2 cars through the first 2 races this year was 15th. So if you would have told me that they'd be 5th in the constructors at this point with 2 runner-up finishes and looking like they could potentially be the team in line to maybe take the fight to Red Bull should they have an off weekend, that they'd be closing in on Ferrari for 4th, maybe even Aston Martin for 3rd, because they seem like they've slipped back a little bit in recent weeks as well. It's been an amazing turnaround for McLaren, and I think that's more where their fight's going to be at this point going forward rather than with Alpine. I don't know that they have enough time left in the season to catch Mercedes, but if they continue this stretch that they've been on recently, that's their challenge at this point rather than worrying about Alpine, who seem to be continuing to self-destruct if the last 2 weekends are any indication.
Self-destruct from Alpine and McLaren. Depending on how that caution safety car came out the last race weekend, Oscar Piastri could have been in the podium position again. He looked at poised for a podium, just didn't work out, but still a top 5 finish today. Very great for McLaren. Adam in the chat room, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri will win in F1. What a performance from both drivers. And I know someone will get later on. Yes, NASCAR's not going on the wrap-up show. There will be still the Xfinity Series and more, but Cup Series we're talking about for the first time tonight.
But don't let that discourage you from tuning into Encore tomorrow. Definitely make sure you still do that.
Definitely stick around for Encore. A lot to talk about. One of the big things, Lewis Hamilton, a lot of hype. Disappointing start, saw him fell back to 4th place. George Russell, he came home 7th despite starting way back 18th. Mercedes, they look like they got a good, securely fastened 2nd place in the championship for the constructors ahead of Aston Martin. Ferrari, as you mentioned, Ben, just very average besides the mistakes on pit road for Charles Leclerc with speeding and then the long pit stop. Wasn't really much of a factor. Sergio Perez, he got in Q3, he got on the podium. Had he been further up towards the front, could have easily been contended for 2nd place or just really control 2nd place if he was ahead of the 2 McLarens. So it looks like overall, when it comes to second place in the drivers, you have Perez, you have the two Mercedes drivers, Hamilton, George Russell. The two Ferrari drivers are still always fast. And now you got to throw in there the two McLaren drivers, Piastri, Lando Norris. They're both looking good. And Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso. Is this the best battle we've seen for second place in years?
In recent years, perhaps it is. I don't know if, obviously Piastri and Norris are driving for a team that's just now started to come into their own here. So the amount of points that they've lost in the beginning of the season, I don't know that they're going to be able to recover that much to take the fight for second. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I think Checo actually has a pretty decent hold on second place right now. If he can continue to just get a podium every weekend, which let's be honest, that's the bare minimum he should be getting in that car. He probably should be finishing second every week to Max Verstappen with how far ahead Red Bull seem to be. But if he can continue, getting these decent finishes in light of his qualifying struggles for the most part over the last several races, he's still been able to bring the car home in sixth or better every race since that disaster weekend in Monaco. So if he can bring home a bag of points every weekend, I think he honestly has second place on a pretty good hold as well. And again, we've been talking about his struggles here. If he can turn it around a little bit, that'll only further increase the advantage he has over everybody else. Fernando Alonso, his last three races, he's finished 5th, 7th, and 9th, so he seems to be slipping a little bit. Maybe the best battle for third, maybe the best battle is going to be for third going forward, I should say, with how strong Red Bull are. I struggle to see Checo falling that far back, so I think that might be more battle at this point. But Mercedes look to be very strong, relative to where they've been in the past, the last year and a half or so here. Lewis Hamilton obviously put in a tremendous lap yesterday to take pole position. I know he fell back at the start, but they look like they might be the team, along with McLaren now, that is best positioned to potentially steal a win if Red Bull can't, in fact, pull off the perfect season. And we know George Russell's obviously a race winner in Formula One as well, so Lewis Hamilton and George Russell have a good chance to do that. Ferrari, I think, could find their way up there. I'm sure they'd love to be up there at their home race in Monza in a few weeks' time. But again, they were practically invisible today. So I think that you more have to look at McLaren and Mercedes to do that, at least in the immediate future here over the next several races.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ben. I think this was one of the best battles that we've seen in the past few years for second place. And I think that it was also a great battle for P3, P4, and maybe even P5. It wasn't just second place that had a tough battle. There were a lot of drivers on the top 5. I mean, not counting first place, obviously, that was Max Verstappen. But for P2 through P5, the drivers were moving around a lot. There was a lot of going up and down and a lot of overtaking. And I think that the battle between Perez and Piastri at first, and then later with Hamilton, trying to overtake Checo, but unable to do so. I think that it was all great. And I think, the battles for P2 to P5 were some of the best that we've seen in recent races.
Now, as we start the second half of the Formula One season for Verstappen, his worst finish this season so far, second place twice. And of course, that was to his teammate Sergio Perez. That's when we all thought maybe Perez will bring the championship battle to Verstappen. That hasn't been the case. McLaren, they want to make it 3 races in a row to have a podium and double points. That'll be a strong start. Mercedes, they're looking to reclaim second in the constructors. Looks like they're on the way to do that. Of course, they'll rather have the top spot in the constructors, but it looks like second place will have to do. Alonso, 6 podiums in the first half of the season. Nothing else so late. And the big surprise for me, Alex Albon, 3 top 10 finishes with Dow Williams. Of course, his rookie teammate Sargent from the United States. No points still. Daniel Ricciardo, his first race back. No points, but unfortunately he was involved in that first lap crash with the 2 Alpines. Isha, starting with you. What stood out in the first half of the season? What do you look most forward to in the second half?
I think for me personally, what stood out the most in the first half of the season was McLaren's revival in the past 3 races or so that we've seen. The first half of the season was pretty much just Max Verstappen winning with very little competition for P1. But with McLaren's recent performances, I'm hoping that the rest of the season will be more entertaining. And I'm looking forward to seeing actual battles happen for pole position rather than just for P2 and P3 and onwards. And even though I'm a little doubtful whether that will happen by the end of the season, I've got my fingers crossed, and I'm hoping to see Max have to put in more effort to win pole.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Obviously, it's hard to look past what Red Bull and Max Verstappen have done. That I think is the top story. And Aston Martin getting off to such a strong start as they did with Fernando Alonso. That's something that I'd like to see a little bit more of in the second half of the year if they can get back. And it's been literally a decade since Alonso was on the top step of the podium. I'm sure a lot of people are pulling for him to get at least one more win to end off his career, kind of like Kimi Räikkönen did for Ferrari at Coda several years ago. I know, again, probably not supposed to say this on the air, but the American in me is pulling for Logan Sargent to at least get a handful of points by the end of the season, if not, at least 1 points finished. So, I'm encouraged by the pace that Alex Albon has on that Williams right now. Maybe Sargent, Monza's always been a strong track for Williams in recent years. Maybe that might be an opportunity for him to pick up some points of his own and be the first American since Michael Andretti 30 years ago to do that. But I'll tell you what, somewhere Steve Matchett's smiling. I know Steve Matchett was always keeping track of the perfect season possibilities for Mercedes when they were so dominant back when NBC had the Formula One rights. I put a poll out on my social media, both my Twitter and my Instagram, asking my followers, do you think Red Bull can pull this off here? You got to get 11 before you can get 22. They've done that. They're halfway there. And Twitter seemed to believe that they are going to do it. I think it was about 67-33, 2/3 in Red Bull's favor that they would pull off the perfect season. The Instagram was the exact reverse. It was 67% saying no, they're not going to pull off the perfect season. But the caveat there is that only 3 people voted, despite 50 people watching my story. So if you follow me on Instagram, go back and vote on the poll. I know not everybody who follows me is an F1 fan, but I'd like to see a little bit more participation in the poll here and see, do you think Red Bull can pull off what has never been pulled off before? McLaren came so close back in 1988. Mercedes came so close in 2016 with 19 of 21. Red Bull had 22 races. They got the first 11. Do you think they can get the second 11 as well? Let me know, and we'll have that conversation from there.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens if the perfect season can be completed. A couple of comments in the chat room from Iron Kong. McLaren has somehow found that secret sauce in F1. Someone check the cost cap. I'm joking. Maybe want to check the catering bill just to see how's that looking as well, as we know the controversy about that. Nothing stopping from Red Bull from another other than themselves. I gotta say, I feel like the only way Red Bull will lose a race, if they beat themselves, they make a mistake. We keep talking about these teams bringing upgrades. It just seems like they have something else up their sleeve.
Well, Joe, just to follow up on that one more time, thinking back to the last time we had a near perfect season in Formula One, if you think back to the 2 races Mercedes lost in 2016, what were they? It was Spain and Malaysia. In Spain, Hamilton and Rosberg took each other out. In Malaysia, Lewis Hamilton lost an engine. Now, if we play that game, I suppose you have to give Monaco to Red Bull and Daniel Ricciardo because they forgot to put his tires out when he was coming into the pits. But if you look at it one way, if you give 100% luck and favor to Mercedes in that regard, that was the only thing stopping them from a perfect season in 2016, was a crash between the 2 teammates and an engine failure later on in the year. So that may very well be the only thing that can stop Red Bull at this point, is if they beat themselves.
It'll be really interesting to see, and of course, we'll be following F1 all season long. Another person that's following F1 all season long, Joshua Burst, unable to join us, but him and his team are going to recap F1 and preview a little bit of the IndyCar.
Well, I thought I'd bring some guests with me this evening as well to my little segment as well here on the Grid Network. Sorry, I can't be with you. You're watching this after the NASCAR race. We have just all finished the IndyCar call. So we're going to do a quick little talk about IndyCar first, then go back to Formula One. Josh T and Omi with us as well from our YouTube channel. And Josh T, first of all, happy birthday to you for the Grid Network team. Just starting, what a crazy 2 races we've seen at Iowa. Pretty much no point in really doing today, because Newgarden 6 times a winner again. What did you make of the race?
It was a classic Iowa race. Hello everybody on Grid Network. Yeah, it was a good Iowa race. Newgarden absolutely loves the circuit. He's so good around it. And I didn't realise Newgarden was into pickleball. So am I. So that's nice there. But yeah, an amazing race. I don't think I've seen a black flag for a loose wheel before, but after what happened at Goodwood Festival of Speed, for anybody in the US that don't know what Goodwood is, it's basically a massive festival where they go up a hill climb in the south of England and a whole wheel, not just a tyre. went off into the crowd. Everybody was okay after checks, thankfully. And then, of course, after what happened in 2020 at the Indy 500 and what happened this year with the Indy 500, they in IndyCar are not taking anything for granted with loose tyres. So a black flag there from Stingray Rob. Benjamin Pedersen also multiple laps down, then retired, and then Ryan Hunter-Reay near the end, Josh, brushed a wall, and we've had a couple of premature yellows today. Some people would say it's premature. Some people, me included, saying they need to check the track because some parts of the safer barrier came off, like advertising, etc.
Yeah, so many cautions today, Omi, as well. The one I think we all agreed on that had to be was for that loose wheel. Narrowly avoiding being hit by Connor Daly, narrowly avoiding everyone else in the field. Grosjean got lucky as well. How bad is it that those wheels can still come through? And it was a poor communication, wasn't it, in the pit lane? Because the rear Jackman was going like, it's not on, and still released the car. So are we going to expect harsher fines for Stingray Rob and the 51 team?
Yeah, I personally think we couldn't. Also, it was a very late decision, which we weren't happy about, to bring out the caution. It should have been brought out much more earlier because luckily the wheel did not hit anyone, but it easily could have, whether it was rolling around. So the caution should have been brought out much more earlier, as we were talking about. But yeah, a bit disappointing with that. It should be brought out much more earlier on, but luckily it did not hit anyone.
Yeah, so Newgarden winning that one, Power second, Alex Palou third. The gap now in the championship moving to 80 points as we move on to the next race, arguably the one you've got a clear schedule for as well at Nashville. Let's talk Formula One then, and a race that promised so much, delivered so little. Hamilton on pole position with Max Verstappen alongside him down towards turn one. At the start though, Josh, it was Zhou Guanyu who sort of forgot that the lights had gone out, didn't release the clutch for over a second. Bottas had to sort of jerk to the inside line, and eventually, when they got going, Zhou locked up, hit Ricciardo, who hit Gasly, who hit Ocon, and it all sort of concertinaed into one. So my question to you is, how long until Zhou Guanyu is actually told by the FIA, look, you've got to really get in tune here, because today it was really driver fault.
It really was. If Zhou keeps doing it, he is... Unfortunately, I'm having to say this, but he is currently a danger to the other drivers on the circuit for not starting as soon as the lights go out. You're meant to. Well, the reaction time of other drivers is 0.2 of a second. So it's a difficult one. An ex-F1 driver, Van der Gaard, Dutch, he's currently in IMSA. And he said on Twitter in response to the 5-second time penalty that Zhou got, as long as his response to the start, and then someone in the replies said, no, it's as fast as your F1 career. So yeah, it was a Twitter. Well, we should now say X.
Yeah, that's going to be X.
Now it was a little bit fiery, and I'll say this on behalf of Upright Fossil. Maybe it could be a little less flamey.
And I tell you what, Ben, if you're on the show tonight on Grid Network, I know you'll be on the Encore show tomorrow as well. I can't wait for your rant about Twitter, my friend. Omi, coming to you as well. Ferrari strategy today was a little bit all over the place as well. Carlos Sainz was sort of managing on his own. Poor race from them. But the one biggest result you've got to take from this as well, Lando Norris, yes, he broke the trophy, but that McLaren genuinely having pace 2 races running. And if they were quick at Silverstone and quick here, they're going to be quick everywhere. So can McLaren steal a win at some point this season?
They absolutely can. They just got to keep putting in the performances, keep getting that second in. One race, Verstappen will have an issue. One race, something will happen and they'll be able to take it. But McLaren, 2 different types of circuits, Silverstone and Hungary, they've performed well at both. So McLaren are definitely in this fight. But as you said, it was a race that did under-deliver. We had so many expectations of it when we ended qualifying with Hamilton just beating Verstappen 0.003 of a second. We went into the race thinking it would be a close fight, and instead we thought it was going to be Hamilton, and we thought it was going to be Hamilton. Then the McLaren's getting involved and the Red Bull all in one fight, but it was actually 33 seconds right at the end of the race where Verstappen beat Lando Norris. So Mercedes still need to work on their race pace. So their qualifying was very good, but their race pace they still need to work on. McLaren, I'd say, are just in there, but Red Bull are just miles clear of everyone. So I think we're all going to be a bit disappointed after the race, especially after thrilling qualifying. And qualifyings this year have all been absolutely thrilling. It's just the races that are under-delivering.
Indeed, and the next time out as well, we're past half distance now, 50% of the year done. Red Bull have won all 11 of them. They've taken a 12th consecutive win as well, the most in a row by a single constructor and manufacturer, so they now have that record. They will go to beat that for single seasons as well. Their now target is to win every single race, and who's to stop them? 9 of the 11 races have been won by Max Verstappen, only 2 by Sergio Perez. Next time out, though, it's the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, and that's always going to be a bit frightening as well. The team will be with us then. I'll see you guys next week as well, and I'll be back on the Grid Tonight show on Wednesday alongside Kobe. But we're going to go for a very well-earned break and probably some ice cream. Finally, though, happy birthday to Josh T. I'll throw it back to you guys up in the studio.
Thank you for that, Josh and team. Now coming back to IndyCar, Alex Palou entered the Hy-Vee doubleheader race weekend at Iowa Speedway with a 117-point lead in the championship over Chip Ganassi Racing teammate Scott Dixon. Palou's been very dominant lately and slowly building his lead, but it was Team Penske's Josef Newgarden who took a bite into Palou's lead. Palou was quiet but consistent in both races, finishing 8th yesterday and 3rd today. Newgarden swept the weekend, winning both races at Iowa Speedway, and I feel like maybe it's time it be renamed Josef Newgarden Speedway after he picked up his 6th career win at the short oval. Entering Iowa, Newgarden was 126 points behind Palou, and now he's cut the gap down to 80 points back. So now I've got a question for both of you, Kobe and Ben. Kobe, we'll start with you. Heading into Newgarden's home race weekend on the streets of Nashville, do you think he can generate enough momentum to challenge Palou for the title?
Well, I think Alex Palou will certainly need to have something, as we've been saying in recent weeks. I think we need to have a catastrophic collapse for him to lose the championship at this point. But certainly Josef Newgarden, like you said, we should just rename the whole place Josef Newgarden Speedway. He has some secret sauce or a golden horseshoe at Iowa Speedway. There's nobody who can touch him right now. Even his 2 Team Penske teammates, Scott McLaughlin, Will Power, they didn't have anything for him. Even that late race restart we saw today. Still, nobody could get by Josef Newgarden. I wonder what his secret is at that track. It's just so amazing to see how one driver is so dominant at a track like he is at Iowa Speedway. But yeah, it's always a good thing, when back to back like this, sweep the entire race weekend, going into your home race on the streets of Nashville, as you said. But as we all know, Nashville is the Talladega of the IndyCar schedule. Anything can happen here, and in a couple of years we've been racing here, it's been pretty chaotic. It's really going to be a race of survival, and depending on where Josef Newgarden is on track, he could very well get caught up in someone's mess at Nashville. So I think it's really difficult to say that Josef Newgarden, is gonna come straight out of Iowa and do the exact same thing at Nashville. I really think that race is just so chaotic and unpredictable that anything can happen. But certainly, I think Newgarden has a lot of momentum heading into his home race, and we'll see if Alex Palou can stay out of trouble. I'm sure if Palou gets into trouble in Nashville and Newgarden has a good race, then the championship fight is going to keep rolling on.
Well, Josh, if you're watching the replay of this, maybe I need to go back on Casey's podcast to share my thoughts on Twitter and threads and all that stuff. I don't know that it's necessarily fits the mold of the racing shows we do here on Grid, but I definitely have some thoughts on that if you were wondering. But we'll save those for another time. Maybe Casey can bring me on his pod again after the Encore show tomorrow. But talking about Josef Newgarden, you're right. It should be renamed Josef Newgarden Speedway in Iowa after the performance that he put on this weekend and the multiple performances that he's put on at that track throughout his entire career. He's won every oval race so far this season. He seems to be the king of the ovals, no matter if it's a super speedway like Indianapolis or a short oval like Iowa. So I think, he's going to be very strong at Gateway. He's got a great shot there. But again, Palou has just been so strong. He was 3rd again today. He picked up a podium perhaps pretty quietly. He was looking like he was going to finish 4th or 5th probably. And then Scott McLaughlin kind of got shuffled back on the restart on his old tires. I know he was begging for new tires there at the end of the race. So I think Palou certainly is still in the driver's seat at this point. If Newgarden can close the gap, he might make Palou's championship gap small enough that it's not a mathematical lock going into the last race. But I think unless Newgarden starts racking off wins left and right, like Palou has been, I think Palou is still very solidly the man to beat when it comes to this championship. But that being said, Newgarden did put a pretty good dent in Palou's lead this weekend, but he did have the advantage of being on ovals where he's very good and having 2 races rather than just the usual one like he'll have the rest of the year. So it's still a very tall order for Newgarden or anybody else in the IndyCar series to beat Palou for this championship.
Yep, and now I believe we have a comment in the chat room. So Adam says, rename Iowa Speedway Newgarden Speedway. He's unstoppable. And now, looking at the second half of today's race, as Josh mentioned before, we saw a scary moment when Stingray Rob's team failed to tighten his wheel, leaving the pits. The loose wheel came off as Rob drove slowly on the apron through turns 3 and 4. And several drivers, such as Connor Daly, Alexander Rossi, and race leader Josef Newgarden, had to swerve to avoid the wheel. So after seeing what happened to Kyle Kirkwood's wheel in the Indianapolis 500, we were very lucky that nobody struck the wheel and launched it over the fence into the grandstands. Stingray Rob's team was disqualified from the remainder of the race. And now we've got another question. Ben, we'll start with you. Did IndyCar race control take too long to throw out the caution flag, and could they have done it sooner?
Absolutely. It was far too long. There were far too many close calls, and we are very fortunate that we didn't have another situation like we had at Indianapolis, really any of the last couple of years. I'm thinking back to when Connor Daly actually did hit the tire that came off of Graham Rahal's car in 2021. And then, of course, just a couple of months ago with Kyle Kirkwood's accident and the horrifying images of that tire flying over the catch fence. Very thankful that it was only a car that was terminally damaged and injured in that incident. That could have been much, much worse. And it could have been much worse today. I think James Hinchcliffe was maybe trying to give race control the benefit of a doubt from the NBC booth, saying, maybe it was at a part of a track where it was behind the inside wall, so maybe it was difficult for them to see. But it was clear enough to all of us on the NBC broadcast that there was a tire bouncing in the middle of the racetrack, and they needed to throw a yellow. So I'm not sure I necessarily buy that excuse. So I think that absolutely it's especially in light of recent incidents that we've seen and knowing how dangerous of a situation that can be. Maybe not as much for the drivers anymore because thankfully we have the aero screen, but certainly if that tire gets launched high enough that it goes over the catch fence and onto the other side, it's when really bad things can happen. So, just disappointing to see that situation from Stingray Rob's team, sending him out there without the tire fully attached, but even more disappointing, I think, from IndyCar Race Control that they didn't get the yellow flag out as soon as they could have potentially.
I was actually a little surprised that they disqualified Stingray Rob's team for this incident because I don't know in recent memory if we've seen a team get disqualified for a situation like this. But I think given the safety hazard and how dangerous this could have been, I fully agree with the decision to tell the 51 team, you guys made a mistake that could have been really dangerous, so park it for the rest of the day. But yeah, I agree with you, Ben. I think IndyCar Race Control definitely took too long to throw out the yellow flag, and as soon as that wheel came off, caution should have been out right then and there. I have no idea what they were waiting for. And like you said, Hinchcliffe tried to give race control benefit of that, say maybe they didn't see it or anything like that. But regardless of the situation, is that wheel was detached far too long, and we're very lucky that nobody was seriously injured by this, and they were able to recover the wheel. But yeah, certainly not a good look for IndyCar Race Control to let this tire roll for as long as it did.
Yep, and it's pretty clear that Newgarden was the big winner this weekend, giving himself a more realistic chance to challenge Palou for the championship. Defending series champion Will Power is still looking for his first win of the year. He did win poles for both races, but he settled for 5th and 2nd place finishes as he couldn't match Newgarden. Last year, Pato O'Ward got a podium in both Iowa races, including a win. This year, he got 3rd place yesterday and 10th place today, which dropped him from 4th to 6th in the championship, 148 points back. So here's our third question. Kobe, we'll start with you. Which driver or team has to feel most disappointed after the Iowa doubleheader?
I think after the performance he had last year, you mentioned him, Pato O'Ward. I think he certainly has to feel the most disappointment. No, Pato's still looking to try to get a win this season and come into Iowa, a place where he's run really well. I figured that this will be a really good place for him to try to get a victory this year, because right now the championship really seems to be out of reach for him after having some not so good finishes earlier in the season. But looking at Josef Newgarden, Team Penske in general, there was really nothing Pato O'Ward or any other driver could do. I know we saw his teammate Felix Rosenqvist earlier today try to take the fight to Newgarden, but he got eat up on that last restart at the very end. And it just seemed like that Team Penske just has this place figured out in general. Aaron McLaren tried their best with Pato O'Ward, Rosenqvist, and Rossi this weekend, but unfortunately, they just could not get the job done. I feel that today's 10th place finish certainly has to be a big disappointment for Pato O'Ward, someone who you really think should have finished up there in the top 5 rather than just picking up a top 10 and a team that probably has to feel disappointed. I have to say, in Andretti Autosport, I certainly expected to see a lot more out of Colton Herta and Kyle Kirkwood. Roman Grosjean, he's just hit or miss, and most of the time it's always hit with him. And Devlin DeFrancesco don't really have much expectations for him, but I feel like the 2 top drivers at Andretti, Kirkwood and Herta, I thought they would have a lot more better performance than what we saw to them this weekend.
Yeah, I think Andretti in particular, I know Kirkwood and Grosjean had a close call in the middle of the race there as well, so they got to be disappointed. But honestly, I think everybody not named Josef Newgarden's got to be a little bit disappointed with how this weekend went when he was just unstoppable, except maybe Alex Palou, because obviously Palou still has a solid lead on the championship and was able to pick up a podium again today. But I guess if I had to single one driver out, I guess I would go with Will Power, who was on the pole for both races, like you mentioned, Isha. I know Power still has that consecutive season streak with at least one win that he's trying to keep up, as does Scott Dixon. So, I don't know how much that means to them individually. Maybe they are more just focused on the championship, but they're so far back in the points at this point. Maybe they still want to salvage one of the streaks they're holding in their illustrious careers, at least. Power looked like he had a chance to do that on his side of things this weekend, and unfortunately came up short to his teammate both times. But like we said, there was just no stopping Josef Newgarden this weekend. He was just on a completely different level.
Yep, and now we'll be going over to Kobe and Joe, who will cover World Rally Championship.
Yeah, World Rally Championships, Rally Estonia saw Kalle Rovanperä dominate the weekend. It was a clean sweep with the power stage ones as well. Right now, only 9 drivers are left in the championship. This is Rovanperä's second win of the year. He's defending champion, as we all know, and he's currently 55 points ahead of Elfyn Evans. Now bringing Joe in for this section. How many drivers legitimately have a shot at the championship with 5 races remaining? It's certainly been a really strange season, with Sebastian Ogier dipping in and winning every now and then it's like, who's the top driver in this championship? Because although Ogier is no longer running full time, it really seems like this World Rally Championship has, I don't want to say identity crisis, but it's really hard to put a pinpoint on who's like the top rally racer right now.
It is, especially when you have a race weekend like this weekend where a lot of folks anticipated Kalle Rovanperä to go out there, get the win. He dominates the race, makes it look easy. And if you're watching this and thinking, oh, I bet you he probably dominates a lot because he's the world champion, he hasn't. This is only his second win of the year. Sebastian Ogier, it seems every time he enters a race, he wins. Granted, same equipment as Kalle Rovanperä and Elfyn Evans. Elfyn Evans, that's the other driver I feel has a legitimate shot at this championship. Thierry Neuville, that Hyundai team. I think that's a sentimental favorite for everyone, considering that was a teammate of Craig Breen. The consistency is just not there. He just needs to start putting together some good runs. And Oitonic, what a disappointment. His home country rally, and he starts off with a 5-minute penalty. It was pretty much, you're not going to win unless everybody somehow crashes ahead of you during the race, which that's asking a lot because these are some of the best rally racers across the world. So really, those are the 4 drivers I see with a legitimate shot at this championship. And just really interesting because, as you mentioned, seems like a bit of identity crisis because Kalle Rovanperä has a good-sized points lead, but he hasn't exactly been the most dominant driver. Sebastian Ogier, when he comes in, if Sebastian Ogier ran the rest of the season, he may be the favorite for the championship. He's just that good. Doesn't seem like he's been away full time that long. Overall, those 4, you're looking at Kalle Rovanperä, Elfyn Evans, Thierry Neuville, and Oitonic.
Yeah, and this seems like a longer conversation we need to save for another day, talking about the identity crisis of World Rally Championship, because when you think WRC, you think Sebastian Ogier, Sebastian Loeb, some of the best rally racers of all time. And then Kali Rovanpera, we feel like he has a really bright future in rally racing. And then you get to all the others in the series, and you're like, can they be one of the top rally racers? Who knows? Yeah, but certainly, I feel if Sebastian Ogier was still running full time, he'd win this championship easily, hands down. But as we know, Ogier's older now. He's decided to cherry pick which ones he wants to do, and it's still amazing how far up Ogier's still in the points, considering he's just running a part-time schedule. And we know the next rally is Rally Finland, and that's primarily gravel. Ottonic has 3 wins here in the last 4 rallies in Finland. Elfyn Evans won the 2021 race. Do you think this is Ottonic's best opportunity to rebound after a disappointing home rally? You definitely want to run well at home, but fortunately, he just didn't do it this year.
Didn't do it this year. This race, when it comes to Rally Finland, the success he has here, he has to feel really good. I got to say this. Considering we're coming down to the end of the season and how far back he is in the championship, he really needs to approach this with the mindset that this is the race. You got to put everything together, run your own race, and see where it comes out the results. Because I feel if he doesn't put too much pressure on himself, he's going to go out there, perform really good, because he's not in a must-win situation just yet. Podium will be ideal for him. If he could get that power stage and those bonus points, even better. But you got to just slowly close in the gap to Kali Rovanpera, because as we mentioned, yeah, he has a little bit of a big lead, but it's not because he's dominating. It's just because everyone in the house has been inconsistent with bad luck. If it wasn't for that engine change and the 5-minute penalty, it would have been a different story. We saw how the morning half of Saturday, he was really good. Friday was really good. But then when the rain showed up, that second half, just making mistakes, costing him time. I think him and that 14 do have a good thing going. You just got to put together a good, smart race. When you entered Rally Finland, you know you have a good shot of winning this race. Do not push it. Do not risk it. Just race each stage as they are. I think he'll be up towards the front and he could really rebound. But if he has a disastrous race at Rally Finland, I think his championship might be really out of reach at that point.
Yeah. Looking at Ottana's recent history in the Rally Finland, I think he has to feel really happy to go to a place where he knows he's good. He can collect all those stage wins, and he can get the overall rally win. It's certainly going to be interesting to see if someone can string together some consistency here and take the fight to Kali Rovanpera for the championship. It's really weird. Instead of seeing just one person that's completely dominating, there's a lot of inconsistency across the board. And if someone can string together some wins, some really good finishes later on in the season, that rally racer could be the one hosting the championship at the end of the year. And we know Rally Finland, that's going to take place in just a couple of weeks' time on August 3rd through 6th. Now we're going to bring Isha and Ben back in for the NASCAR Cup Series action at the Tricky Triangle. It was quite a day in the Pocono Mountains. A lot of hot tempers and drivers not happy with one another.
For NASCAR, a packed crowd at Pocono Raceway saw an action-packed race with plenty of drama, multiple cautions, and fierce racing on the restarts. On a late race restart, in a similar move he pulled on Ross Chastain a year ago, Denny Hamlin got underneath Kyle Larson into turn 1, leaving no room as Larson got up into the wall. Shortly afterward, Larson showed his displeasure to Hamlin by lightly pushing the number 11 Toyota into the wall on the front stretch. When the final restart came around, Hamlin fired off well and set sail to win the race, while Larson faded with a damaged car, finishing a disappointing 20th after being in contention to win. Hamlin was showered with a massive amount of boos from the fans, who obviously weren't pleased with his move on Larson. After the race, Larson said he felt pissed by the move and doesn't understand why he deserves to be raced that way by Hamlin. The two drivers are friends off the track, and this is the second time they've come together racing for a win this year. Remember, the last lap at Kansas Speedway, Hamlin turned Larson into the wall on the backstretch and went on to win that race too. Now here's a question for Ben and Joe. We'll start with Ben. Did you consider Hamlin's move on Larson today at Pocono a dirty move, just hard racing for the win, and does Hamlin have a target on his back now?
Well, I think Hamlin's had a target on his back for quite a while. I don't think he's earned the benefit of a doubt from very many race fans when it comes to moves like this. I think if Hamlin had a reputation as being one of the cleanest drivers in the series, like a Martin Truex Jr., ironically his teammate, and hadn't been caught up in these incidents before, particularly with Hendrick Motorsports, with Chevrolet and Ross Chastain, with Kyle Larson and the number 5 team, I think people might give him a little bit more of a benefit of a doubt. I don't think that this was his most egregious incident that we've ever seen, but when you take that into consideration with the fact that it was very similar to the movie Polo on Ross Chastain a year ago, and the fact that, like you mentioned, Isha, they had a history Kansas this year with them fighting for the win, Hamlin and Larson, and the contact that they made there. I don't think very many fans are too happy with Denny Hamlin, nor is NASCAR and NBC's Kyle Petty. This is something that I saw while scrolling through social media while Josh was giving his thoughts on the racing this weekend. Kyle Petty apparently had this to say, saying straight up, "You're not the victim, Denny Hamlin. It was a great race. I enjoyed every lap. The ending, I don't appreciate that because we saw this same move last year." Those are Kyle Petty's thoughts on Denny Hamlin's move on, I guess you could say, Ross Chastain. That's the comment that NASCAR and NBC left there. That's referring to a year ago. Obviously, we just saw the same move on Kyle Larson today. And I think, again, like I said, that's why fans aren't going to be too happy with Denny Hamlin and the move he pulled on Kyle Larson today to get the win, because he has a history of these types of incidents. So to answer the question, absolutely, he has a target on his back now. If he didn't already, I think there's a very strong case to be made that he's had this target on his back for quite a while anyway.
Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, those two are going to, I think, be having an interesting remainder of the season. Because here's the thing. As you mentioned, Ben, with Kansas, what happened there and Denny Hamlin, didn't meant to do that. Then we have this situation where it's just everyone comparing it to Ross Chastain. Now, we remember what happened at Darlington between Ross Chastain and Kyle Larson, how everybody is. Can you imagine if Ross Chastain had made this move instead of Denny Hamlin? I think we'll be all over Chastain and how hard he is. What Denny Hamlin did, again, he tries to say, well, it's hard racing. He said him and Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman, when Alex Bowman spun and there was no contact, he said that was hard racing. They just wrecked themselves. I think it's getting to the point, as Kyle Larson said in the NBC post-race interview, that he's going to race Denny Hamlin a little bit different now, because as Kyle Larson said, he never really had to apologize for how he races Denny Hamlin, but that doesn't seem to go the other way around. And what really surprised me, because there's been a lot of talk about how they're off track, the way he was saying, Denny's always right. It almost seems like there might be some feelings there where it's like, okay, it may not be exactly the best of buddies there. The term frenemies almost comes to mind as well, too, when it comes to those two. Overall, I do see Denny Hamlin racing with the target. Kyle Larson, he's a hard racer. He wants to get the win. If those two are racing hard for the win, neither one are going to give an inch. And I think Kyle Larson is just going to give a little bit more bumper if he was behind Denny Hamlin going forward.
Yeah, just real quick, Joe, what is it Matt White put in our group chat after the finish? Actions hypocritical. I think that might apply to the move that we've seen Denny Hamlin pull a couple of times here. And I think actions detrimental. His podcast is going to be a must listen, though. So at least we'll get some entertainment out of that. But yeah, certainly not going to get the benefit of a doubt from many fans, I don't think, for the move he pulled today.
Yep, and in addition to this controversial move, there was another controversial moment which occurred when Ryan Preece spun and stalled, but NASCAR did not immediately throw the caution after Hamlin took the white flag. With Pocono being a big 2.5-mile track, it seemed like they wanted to see if Preece could get the car restarted and let them race back to the checkered flag. Unfortunately, Preece was stuck and NASCAR had no choice but to throw the caution as the field was racing back toward him at full speed. This left many criticizing race control for not throwing the yellow flag immediately for a potential overtime finish because they've put out the caution in similar situations. On a side note, post-race video emerged of Preece rushing over to Corey LaJoie sitting inside his car to throw a few punches inside the driver's window before being pulled away from the scene by officials. Now, Joe, we'll start with you this time. Should NASCAR have thrown the caution immediately after Preece spun, or do you agree with the call to wait it out to see if he would have started rolling again?
Overall, I feel if they had waited to get him rolling, and if he did get rolling, this would not be an issue at all. We've seen how NASCAR, they'll try to get the race done, and if there's a caution, as long as you don't have that group of cars coming, you don't see the caution. But if you have somebody up front, a hard hit, and you want the safety team to get there right away, that's where you have the caution comes out. So overall, I feel when it came to this, from listening to the broadcast, it seemed like NASCAR really wanted to get this race done without going into overtime. It is a 2.5-mile track, but unlike Talladega, where you have to bank it, with this flat banking here, it takes quite some time to get around. So I could see where NASCAR was hoping, hey, let's just keep it going, because if we get into overtime, we're going to have people, I think, similar to what happened in a couple of events where it's like, hey, we got a driver coming to the white flag. Instead, they got the yellow flag. We went into overtime. And then it would have looked pretty bad if Ryan Preece got going. Then, well, we're in overtime, but Preece got going. So was this really the best call? I just feel this is one of those situations where NASCAR was in a no-win situation at all. I think they handled it as best as they could, because if Ryan Preece had got going, we're not talking about this at all.
I can't believe the fans have put me in a situation here where I have to defend NASCAR race control. I can't believe it. Usually I'm the first person to get all over them for the mistakes that they make in the closing laps of how they call these races. But first of all, I am never going to complain when we get a race that ends at the scheduled distance and don't go into overtime. So that's number one. Number two, Joe, I think you're absolutely right. If Ryan Preece had gotten going again, we're not having this conversation right now. It would have been a clean finish to the end. We would be applauding NASCAR for not being trigger happy on the caution button and forcing an overtime finish. And I thought that was what was going to happen. It looked like Ryan Preece had very minimal damage, that he would just be able to refire and drive away. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And because that didn't happen, NASCAR waited as long as they could. They got onto the final lap. Ryan Preece was still sitting in the middle of the racetrack, and you can't have cars coming by 200 miles an hour with a car just sitting there completely motionless with no sign of it getting started again anytime soon. They had to throw the caution there, so I applaud NASCAR for the decision they made, because like you mentioned, Joe, I think they were in a no-win situation, at least with parts of the fan base. They were never going to please anybody with this situation playing out the way it did. But I think they made the most of the situation and tried to keep the caution from coming out and forcing another restart. And we've seen the Xfinity Series the last couple of weekends, the restarts can be problematic. We saw it today trying to get through turn one during the second stage. I think NASCAR was ready to end the race if they could, and they did everything in their power to keep it green as long as they could, to give Ryan Preece as much time as he needed to get the car refired. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it, but that's racing sometimes. Sometimes races end under caution. I'm sorry, Reddit, but that's the way it goes.
So in addition to these two controversial moments, there was a third and final controversial moment of this eventful race, which occurred when Tyler Reddick and Austin Dillon were racing for position. Reddick went really low underneath Dillon, heading down into turn one. The former teammates made contact, sending Dillon hard into the outside wall. Dillon got out of his car and threw his helmet at Reddick in frustration. When asked if he needs to talk to Reddick, Dillon said no, he just needs to start wrecking people. Now, we'll start with Ben. Do you think a part of Dillon's fiery response to Reddick is related to the difficult season he's having, especially when the other RCR car is running well?
And especially when Reddick is a former RCR teammate who's historically run better than Dillon has. Look, I'd be upset too if I were 29th in points and my teammate were a championship contender who's won 3 races this year. Now, in complete fairness to Dillon, I believe he did have a points penalty earlier in the season, so he'd probably be a little bit higher up in the standings had he not gotten that penalty. And it's not like he hasn't had any good runs this year, but on the whole, certainly he's been much weaker than his teammate Kyle Busch. I know that was one of the discussions we had after Fontana. Could Kyle Busch coming to RCR help elevate both programs? Unfortunately for Dillon, it doesn't seem like it's elevated with 3 cars as much as some of us thought it might. And absolutely, it's got to have been a very frustrating year for him and the number 3 team, that part of the RCR operation there. But, I don't really, like I said, I get the frustration, but, you're going to throw your helmet at your former teammate there when, it was borderline at best. I think if anything, some people seem to think Dillon came down and it was more wreck of his own doing. But it'll be interesting to see what the response is to this, because people were making the Tony Stewart comparisons when he threw his helmet at Matt Kenseth, and then 2 years later, Kevin Ward Jr. got pretty upset at Tony Stewart wearing a dark fire suit on a dark track, and unfortunately lost his life that night. And it instituted a rule that trickled all the way back up to NASCAR, but drivers have to stay in their cars until the safety team gets there, unless the car's on fire and they have to get out for those safety reasons. Dillon marched back up the racetrack and threw his helmet at a competitor. So we'll see if there's any sort of fine or penalty that comes from that. But I think, while I understand the frustration on Austin Dillon's part, because I know it's been a tough season, I think it was a little bit over the line in terms of how he reacted to this particular incident today.
And one of the things that sort of reminds me, Austin Dillon, we got to remember at Gateway, what happened when he got wrecked by Austin Cindric? He right away, I was hooked. He needs to be disqualified because we were just coming off what happened at Charlotte. I get it that Austin Dillon is not having the great of a season. Anytime you're having a good run or a decent run when you're struggling and something happens where you feel like it was out of your control, the last thing you want to do is to say, that was my mistake. And if anything, you feel like it was taken away from you, that good result, that potential great finish. So I can understand the heat of the moment. Austin Dillon, feeling Tyler Reddick, wrecked him. We know Tyler Reddick was his teammate, as you mentioned. He's now no longer there. And look, Tyler Reddick, second place. Austin would have been really mad if Tyler Reddick had gotten that win. I just feel that he cannot be exactly the most happy place where your former teammate got to win, potential championship contender, and then your current teammate who came from the Toyota organization that your old teammate went towards is now winning 3 races, championship contender. We're talking about it, and we're not talking about the number 3 team. We know there's always some of that extra criticism about his family role with the team. Is he really in the spot to hold that ride? A lot of pressure on Austin Dillon. I think it is really starting to get to him now. And I think that's why we're seeing some of this pressure getting released when it comes to him saying these kind of comments, because borderline racing incident, this is hard racing, this is NASCAR, remind me a lot of Gateway, where he tried to say, hey, I was hooked, you need to disqualify Austin Cindric. And then NASCAR said, nope. And it's just one of those deals for Austin Dillon. He just needs to have a good break. If anything, I think he's one of the drivers, unless you get a crazy good car in Michigan, I think really Daytona's his only ticket to the playoffs.
Now, taking a quick look at the playoff bubble drivers, in the unofficial standings, Bubba Wallace is 26 points above the cut line, while Michael McDowell has a 17-point advantage in the 16th and final spot. AJ Allmendinger is the first driver out, 17 points back. After crashing out and finishing last, Daniel Suarez is at a 23-point deficit. Ty Gibbs, 28 points back, and Alex Bauman is 45 points out. Now, starting with Joe, which one of those drivers should feel most confident about their chances at collecting valuable stage points and a good result at Richmond next weekend?
When it comes to Richmond next weekend, I'm looking at Alex Bowman, actually. I feel like that is a team that could have a good, solid run. And I'll be honest, I think they could be potentially going there for the win. When it comes to the Toyotas, it seems like they've been a little bit hit or miss there when it comes to Richmond. If they are a hit and they got a good setup, I say Ty Gibbs is going to be one of the surprises. He got a top 5 finish today. I feel that team has really been coming together really nicely for a rookie season. I would not be surprised if he gets another top 5 finish and slowly close the gap. With this track coming up at Richmond, I think Michael McDowell might be a little bit more on the nervous side. This is one of the tracks where you got to have a good, strong run. You have to have good strategy as well, too. Richmond lately has not exactly been the type of short track racing where we've seen a lot of cautions. We've seen a lot strung out. I feel this could be a disadvantage for that team. Overall, at Bowman, I think he's in a good spot. If Toyotas are strong, Bubba Wallace and Ty Dillon will be good as well too. But that's if Toyota are coming out strong at Richmond.
You know, Joe, normally I'd agree and I'd say Bowman, but, especially considering he's won at Richmond before, but just the way he's been running since he came back from his injury. I know he was in position to have a strong run today before falling back. I just don't know that team is at a position right now where they can be liable to go out and win on any given Sunday. So I don't know. Looking at some of these other drivers, though, I don't know that anybody really necessarily stands out. I look at McDowell, I look at Allmendinger, I look at Suarez. I think all of those guys are going to have a much better shot maybe at the Indy Road Course or when we come time for Daytona, the final race before the cutoff to get into the playoffs there. Ty Gibbs probably the same way. Daytona would probably be his best shot, although he has stepped it up a little bit. Maybe he could surprise us like you were mentioning, Joe. I guess at least only one driver left. Maybe I'll go with Bubba Wallace there. Toyota seemed to show some speed today. Maybe he can position himself to, if not win the race, maybe increase that gap a little bit as we go into Richmond.
And now we'll take a look at the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship with Ben.
Thank you, Isha. I believe we're going to bring Kobe back in for that as well. But yesterday, the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship ran its annual GT-only race at Lime Rock Park in what was a very competitive race. Aston Martin swept the GTD Pro and GTD classes with the heart of racing teams number 23 and number 27 Aston Martin Vantage AMR GT3s. It's a much-needed win for Ross Gunn and Alex Riberas in the GTD Pro category, in an inconsistent season that's been filled with bad luck. It was also a good day in the championship for Marco Sorensen and Roman DeAngelis in GTD, getting that win and trying to close the gap to championship leaders Brian Sellers and Madison Snow, who did not have such a good day at Lime Rock Park. So, Kobe, we'll bring you back in here. How good must this win feel for the Heart of Racing's GTD Pro program that's been playing catch-up all year long? And can its GTD team start taking the fight to Paul Miller Racing?
For their GTD program, Ross Gunn, Alex Riberas, this is a major shot in the arm for them. Entering the season, a lot of people expected to see them running a lot better with the others in this All Pro GT category, but unfortunately, this team has actually been the, I believe, the only full-time entry in this class not to win this season, and they finally got the monkey off their back. It was always seemed like bad luck's been plaguing them, or just didn't have the speed. And the car that they won in, this is actually a backup chassis that they had to get, because you remember watching Canadian Tire Motorsport Park a short while ago. They were crashed out of the race and totally destroyed their car, and to be able to do this and a backup short turnaround, getting the Lime Rock Park, definitely a big deal for the team. And they also won. It was also a big day for Harder Race in general, because both cars swept the race on team principal. Ian James's birthday. He was also an endurance driver for the team, so definitely a big happy birthday there to Ian James. But seeing both of his Aston Martins getting a big win here. Now looking at the GTD entry, Roman DeAngelis, Marco Sorensen, really good race for them. And remember, Roman DeAngelis is the defending GTD champion, so he's trying to defend his championship. And while Paul Miller Racing's been the most dominant team in this category all year long, they had an off day yesterday at Lime Rock Park, and this certainly gives momentum for Roman DeAngelis to try to defend that championship, also Marco Sorensen as well, to put themselves in the right position moving forward, as we only have a few more races to go later on in the season. Based on previous history, it seems like Paul Miller Racing will continue to have strong showings, and maybe this was just a one-off bad race, but Paul Miller Racing is going to run into some trouble here late in the season with Road America, Indy, and Petit Le Mans to go. Then we're going to need to see the Harder Racing team really step up its game and try to be very consistent, and hope you catch Paul Miller Racing on another off day.
And looking ahead, the next IMSA race will take place in 2 weeks' time as the 2023 season enters its final stretch of races. All 5 classes will be in action on Sunday, August 6th at Road America. Then there's another GT-only race at VIR, followed by the final 2 races with everyone at Indianapolis and Motul Petit Le Mans to close out the season in mid-October.
And now we're going to bring everyone back on for our grid one shining moment of this racing weekend. And Ben, throwing it back to you. What's your one shining moment?
Well, what stands out to me is I'm going to go back to Pocono and the NASCAR Cup Series. I want to give a call to Harrison Burton coming home in 8th place. I know a lot of people have said he was probably moved up to the Cup Series way too early. Maybe should have had another year or two in the Xfinity Series, but that's just the way rides opened up with him. Toyota, oftentimes we say, has too many drivers in the lower series and not enough places to put them when they get to Cup. So he had an opportunity to join the Wood brothers in the 4th team over there. Maybe a little bit too soon, but I know it's been a struggle for him to get up to speed. It's good to see him have a solid run today to bring the car home in 8th place in a year where Ford has arguably been the weakest manufacturer of the 3. Great run for him and that team. I'll give my one shining moment to Harrison Burton today.
For my shining moment, I'm going to go back to Formula One. And personally, I thought that, Lewis Hamilton, having had pole position from yesterday's qualifications, would have held on to his lead longer. But Max Verstappen came in, and in the first few seconds, he was way ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And it reminded me a little bit of how Lando Norris last race cut in front of Max Verstappen. So I think that was personally my favorite shining moment.
My shining moment when it comes to this race weekend, I have to go all the way to Formula One, and what a shout out to McLaren again. A lot of people were questioning, okay, this last race weekend, you had a strong run. Was this something where we're just going to see it here and then it falls back down again, they have been really progressing a lot. I don't see them no longer contending with Alpine. I see them as well going forward. McLaren, they get my shining moment.
And I know the team on tomorrow night's Encore show is going to talk a little bit more about this, but I'm going to give my one shining moment to Kyle Busch Motorsports for winning their 100th race in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. It's been so incredible watching KBM over the years build this organization into a true powerhouse and the model team of the Truck Series for all of these years. Kyle Busch has certainly had a lot of talented drivers come up and drive for him over the years and all of that, and then Kyle himself jumping into that truck, winning all of these races as well. This has been truly remarkable to see KBM reach this milestone, and now we're going to be counting down to see how long is it going to take for this organization to get 200 wins. It's certainly going to take a while. And on an interesting note, Kyle's talked about Kyle Busch Motorsports recently in the media in regards to his future, how potentially towards the end of his full-time driving career, he wants to go down to the Truck Series and run full-time to try to say that he won a Cup Championship, an Xfinity Championship, and a Truck Championship as well before turning over the truck to his son Brexton Busch, who he expects to drive for him in the distant future.
And Kobe, I'm glad you brought that up. That is actually going to be our open segment on the Encore show tomorrow. And where I stand on the issue, I'm hopefully going to have an op-ed coming out for Brock Beard and lastcar.info this week, because people who know that site know that he, my fellow staff writer William Soki, we all share the opinion that we're not a fan of Cup drivers going into the lower divisions. But where I stand on Kyle Busch maybe running for a truck championship might surprise you. So stay tuned for that article. Stay tuned to the Encore show tomorrow. We're going to have much more to talk about it on the show. And I'm very interested to hear where Josh Birch stands on this, because we know Josh certainly doesn't like seeing Kyle Busch in the Truck Series. But would that change if he made himself a dedicated truck driver and ran for a championship? It's an interesting question to consider. We'll do that on tomorrow's show.
And of course, tomorrow's show right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss Grid Live wrap up, and then Wednesday Grid Tonight. Then we do it all over again with the Grid Live pre-race show on Saturday. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, be sure to visit our website, gridranking.com, see our written articles, see some of the information about the team. Follow their team on our social media as well too. And of course, be sure to hit the Buy Me a Coffee, show your support for our team members, or contribute to the Grid Network. But if you really want to invest in the Grid Network, Patreon, link in the video description. Call the show Mark, Rob, and David, the newest member. Invest in us each and every month. We're hopeful to get to $500 a month so we could be at the track much more frequently, especially for 2024, a very exciting, promising season. For the rest of 2023 and 2024, we want to be there. For Isha, Ben, Kobe from the Podium Finish, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.